Peter Lynch has always said, buy a business that's so good that any idiot can run it, because sooner or later one will. And, well, all I know is if I buy the right kind of business at the right price with the right people, I'll do well over time.
You're about to meet one of the most successful investors in the world, Warren Buffett. He gained that distinction by shrewdly investing his own and other people's money. Starting in the 1950s and 1960s, he ran an investment partnership that earned a remarkable annual average return of nearly 30% per year for 13 years. In 1965, he paid $12 a share for a company named Berkshire Hathaway. In 1995, Berkshire Hathaway, which is now an investment holding company, was trading on the New York Stock Exchange for over $25,000 per share. Based in Omaha, Nebraska, Berkshire Hathaway owns shares in such large companies as Coca-Cola, Gillette, and Capital Cities ABC, as well as 100% of such smaller companies as See's Candies, H.H. Brown Shoes, and a furniture store in Omaha, Nebraska named the Nebraska Furniture Mart. In 1994, Forbes magazine listed Warren Buffett as the second richest man in America, but he's famous for far more than just his wealth. His common sense approach to business decision-making is widely admired, both for its wit and its wisdom. In what follows, you'll hear about how he chooses companies to buy, about his views on predicting the stock market, and about some of his favorite people, including Rose Blumpkin, the 101-year-old founder of the Nebraska Furniture Mart. The format's the one he enjoys the most, a dialogue with a group of students who are invited to throw at him any questions they like. He begins with a story about near disaster in the financial world. It happened when the top management of the huge Wall Street securities firm of Salomon Brothers, in which Berkshire Hathaway held a stake, was forced to resign after a treasury bond trading scandal. Mr. Buffett stepped in as chairman, and his first challenge was to find the right man to run the highly leveraged company, and fast.
I really had a lesson on unemployment a few years ago when on August 14th of 1991, I got a phone call at 6:45 in the morning. It was the top management of Salomon, and they told me at 7:15 essentially that the head of the Fed of New York, who was the most powerful man in finance basically, told them that the top management was unacceptable and that therefore they were going to offer their resignations, and there was no one there to run the place. And that was a matter of some concern, because at the time Salomon had balance sheet totals of $150 billion, of which about $4 billion was equity and the other $146 billion was owed to someone else. And that was the largest amount owed by any American corporation except for Citicorp at that time. It's larger than the liabilities of the Prudential Insurance Company, larger than the liabilities of the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, American Express, whatever. And there was one problem about this $146 billion. A very high percentage of it came due within a few weeks. And so that was the situation, and I went back to New York that day, on that Friday, and I met that evening, and this is where it may start getting relevant to this group. One of the problems I was going to have the following week was I needed somebody to run the place. There were 8,000 people and this $150 billion of balance sheet assets and liabilities and a complex business. And essentially somebody had to be making decisions minute by minute about the operations, because I was going to have to be dealing with regulators and legislators and people of that sort. So I met 12 people, roughly 12, that evening, a dozen or so. And I probably knew 4 or 5 of them by sight. And there were probably 6 or 7 that I didn't know, although I probably knew their names. So as I interviewed these people, making what for me was the most important hire by far that I'll ever have to make, it may be of interest to you, because it may not be quite as dramatic a time when you get hired, but it may be some of the same things going through the person that's looking at you, the mind of the person that's looking at you. The good news is I did not ask them their grades in business school. The bad news, of course, is I didn't ask them whether they'd been to business school at all. I never looked at a resume. It wouldn't have made any difference. I knew that all 12 had the IQ to handle the job. No one had gotten to that position in the firm without being smart enough to know all the instruments and know how markets worked and all of that sort of thing. So it wasn't a question of IQ at all. It's just sort of hearing how their machinery works, and you can tell the people that are very full of themselves. I mean, they're very easy to do. You find a few of those in investment banking, believe it or not. You know, you can probably detect perhaps the ones that aren't going to have the courage in a situation like that. But I wanted the qualities, you know, the same thing Ben Franklin wrote about a couple hundred years ago. The people who are always willing to give the other person more credit than themselves, and who don't cut corners, and who deliver all they promise and a little extra. And essentially, I was very lucky because I found that individual, a fellow named Derek Maughan, and the next day, the board met, and we had a lot of complications that day, and we had a group of about 200 reporters, probably about this size, in an auditorium would come in on Sunday to cover this story, and I walked out, they assembled at about 2:30, I walked out of the directors' meeting about 2:45, it was late because of other problems, and there these 12 were, and I just walked up to Derek, and I tapped him on the chest, and I said, "You're it, pal," and we went right down to the auditorium, and 200 or so reporters fired questions at him for 3 hours while he sat up at the podium with about 2 minutes notice that he was going to be running the firm. A month later, Derek Maughan never had asked me what he was getting paid. The question of his salary had never come up. Forget about stock options or anything like that. Never came up. He just walked right up and never said a word about it, and took on the job. Worked 18-hour days for months and months and months. Showed uncanny judgment about what to bring up to me and what not to bring up to me, and all sorts of things like that. And I often use this illustration with a class, is that I say to them, if you were looked under your seat today and one of you had this lucky ticket, and the one who had that ticket got to pick one of their classmates, who'd been together for a couple of years or whatever, and you got to pick one of your classmates, and you could pick anyone you wanted to. You had an hour to make the decision, and you would get 10% of the earnings of that individual for the rest of their life. And you don't pick the guy with the richest father in the class, but well, assume you pick everybody that's starting from scratch. But what would you think about in that hour in terms of who you picked? Would you think about who had the highest grades in the class? Probably not. Would you think about who had the highest IQ? Probably not. You know, the best looking? Probably not. A whole bunch of things would go through your mind. I think you'd be amazed at how most of you would settle on a relatively few individuals. But the interesting thing is that when you think about what's going through your mind, you're not thinking about things that are impossible for you to achieve yourself. You're not thinking about who can jump 7 feet, who can throw a football 65 yards, who can recite pi to 300 digits or whatever it may be. You're thinking about a whole bunch of qualities of character. And the truth is that every one of those qualities is obtainable. They're largely a matter of habit. Ben Franklin, and actually my old boss Ben Graham, when he was 12 years old, wrote down all the qualities that he admired in other people, and he wrote down the qualities that he found objectionable. And he looked at that list, and there wasn't anything there about being able to run the 100-yard dash in 9.6 or high jumping 7 feet. They were all things that were simply a matter of deciding whether you were going to be that kind of person or not. And when you're young, you really have that opportunity. As you get older, it gets tougher because somebody has said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And in terms of behavior, I see that all the time. So the time to form the right habits is very early, but it's the right habits, the habits that you would time to form the right habits is very early, but it's the right habits, the habits that you would admire in someone else and want to buy 10% of whatever individual that is, they're absolutely obtainable. And if you had to sell short one other member of your class, these deals always come with a hooker, and you had to pay 10% of their earnings, again, you wouldn't pick the person with the lowest grades or anything. You'd think about the person who always cut corners or claimed credit for things that they didn't do, never showed up on time. All these little things that seem like nothing, but they determine whether if you have a 300 horsepower motor, whether you get 300 horsepower output out of it or whether you get a whole lot less. And the people I see that function well are not necessarily the people with the biggest motors, but they're the people with the most efficient motors. And it's those qualities of character that really make an enormous difference. So what I would suggest to you is think about that person you'd buy 10% of and the one you'd short 10% of, and think about why you would do it. And then ask yourself, what on this left-hand side of the list can't I achieve myself, and what on the right-hand side of the list can't I get rid of myself if I possess it? And in the end, decide you're going to be the person that you buy the 10% of. That's enough of the sermon. I'd like to answer questions now, and really the nastier they are, the better I like it, because it's much more fun, makes it more interesting. So let's start off with one here.
Mr. Buffett, I was reading, it sounds like you and Charlie Munger's analysis of some companies is very back of the envelope. Could you just tell us about the financial analysis that you do on companies, whether it be like Rose Blumkin's Furniture Mart or whether it be Coca-Cola?
Well, yeah, those are two good examples. There's a Furniture Mart in Omaha that's going to do, at one location, $230 million of business. It's more than twice as much business as any other single-store furniture operation in the country. And it's not really run by now, but she's still the spiritual head of the place. A woman named Rose Blumkin is going to be 101 years of age in December. And she came over here and landed in Seattle with a tag around her neck, and couldn't speak a word of English. The Red Cross got her, actually got her to Iowa first, and then she came over and started this store. After bringing over 7 siblings and her mother and father from Russia, she started this store with $500. And now has a store that does $230 million. She works 7 days a week. She's working, as we talk, she'll be working Sunday, and amazing woman. And the punchline, she put all these people out of business. The punchline is that she can't read or write. Yeah, her business will make $22 million, $23 million pre-tax this year. If you told her this room was 47 by 38, she would tell you how many square yards that is in her head, and extend it out at $5.98 a yard and add the sales tax and knock off something because she liked you. It is a real story. So I would say, incidentally, on something like that, that's all the analysis you need. If you can buy into a business that's run by somebody or with their family that runs it that way. Our total legal and accounting fees in buying that business were $1,400, and it was a one-page contract, and it just affirmed that she owned the place, and that I was going to get good title, and that there was no audit. I never looked to see what the real estate records were on the 60 acres in Omaha or anything of the sort. But I just knew that anything she said was so, and you feel very comfortable buying a business like that. I mean, I think that any good investment idea probably can be put in one paragraph. I mean, now. There are all kinds of investment ideas that I'm not going to be able to understand. I believe very strongly, as does Mrs. B, as Rose Blumkin is called, I believe very strongly in operating with what I call my circle of competence. And the most important thing in terms of your circle of competence is not how large the area of it is, it's how well you've defined the perimeter. If you know where the edges are, you're way better off than somebody that's got one that's 5 times as large, but they get very fuzzy about the edges, around the edges. And I can understand some kinds of simple businesses. I can't understand complicated businesses. Coca-Cola was about 110 years old now, and selling 750 million 8-ounce servings of their products a day around the world. Per capita consumption going up in virtually every country in the world after about 110 years or so, and it has 47% of the soft drink consumption throughout the world outside the United States, 41% of the United States, and gaining share every year. It isn't very complicated. I mean, you have to decide, A, whether it's a product that is somewhat durable, which I think has been illustrated, and whether the appeal is universal, which it certainly is, and then whether you have honest and competent management running it, which you most certainly do. Peter Lynch has always said, buy a business that's so good that any idiot can run it, because sooner or later one will. We would like to buy a business like that, and then we'd like a terrific guy running it. And we had 2 terrific people at Coke running it. All we're trying to do is try and find businesses we think we can understand, where we like the people running them, and where the price makes sense in relation to the future economics. And when I find that, I like to buy a lot of it and keep it. And they're hard enough to find that I don't believe in selling them very often because it's hard to find replacements. Are we over here now? Yeah.
Mr. Buffett, how do you know when to sell a business and when is it time to do that?
Well, the question about selling a really great business is never, because to sell off something that is a really wonderful business because the price looks a little high or something like that, it's almost always a mistake. And it took me a long time to learn that. I haven't fully learned it yet, but it's rare that it makes sense. If you really believe that the long-term economics of the business are terrific, it's very rare it makes any sense to sell it. Now, if you get into some technology company or something where 5 guys are out in a garage someplace doing something that's going to change the whole industry, that's beyond me anyway. And if you try to jump from flower to flower among groups like that, I think you probably have to, because I'm not sure that you can pick permanent winners. But I would say that if you keep it very simple, we own a lot of Gillette, for example. There are 21 billion razor blades used in the world a year. 30% of those are Gillettes, but 60% by value are Gillettes. They have 90% market shares in some countries, in Scandinavia and Mexico. Now, when something's been around as long as shaving, and you find a company that has that kind of both innovative power in terms of developing better razors all the time, plus the distribution power and the position in people's minds, for an item that only costs $20 a year. I mean, the difference, here's something you do every day. I hope you do it every day. And for $20 a year, you get a terrific shaving experience. Now, men are not inclined to shift around a lot, when they get that kind of a situation. So you get that, and who knew was come into the blade market? Wilkinson 30 years ago had a shot for a period like that, and they didn't take advantage of it with a stainless steel blade. But it's not going to change a lot. And I like businesses where I think I know what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I think I know what Gillette will look like, and I think I know what Coke will look like. And it opens up around the whole. I mean, for one thing, you go to bed feeling very comfortable. Just thinking of 2.5 billion males with hair growing while you sleep. I mean, no one at Gillette has trouble sleeping. I mean, it's like investments. That's the beauty of the investment business. I don't have to be right on all of these companies I don't understand. I don't have to be right on Oracle Systems or Microsoft or DuPont. I just have to be right on one decision a year. It's a beautiful business that way. I was in the department store business for a while. Don't ask me why. But I was in it, and if my competitor air conditioned, I had air conditioned. If my competitor offered 18-month terms instead of 12-month terms, I had to offer it. If you put in an escalator, I had to put in. All of those were defensive decisions. I had to make those like that. I mean, he was throwing pitches at me, and I had to swing, no matter whether the ball was good or not. But in investments, there's no such thing as a called strike. You can stand there at the plate. Very rich, because you would think about every single one you made, and when you knew enough to make a decision, you'd do it on a big scale. But buying businesses on Wall Street is so easy. You can buy one at 10 o'clock and sell it at 10:05, and you can become a part owner of General Electric at 10:10. That the very ease with which that can be done causes people to do a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. But most of the fortunes have been made in relatively few securities, and ones that were held for a very long time, and ones that the buyer understood. Yep.
Mr. Buffett, you invest in companies with managers that you say you like and you trust and admire, and I'd like to know who you like and trust and admire in politics and business today.
Well, in business, I can tell you that there's nobody that I admire more than the CEO of Cap Cities, Tom Murphy. I admire Roberto Goizueta and Don Keogh, who retired recently, but they were one of the great two-manager combinations in the history of business at Coke. They took the market value from $5 billion to now $60 billion in a matter of 11 or 12 years. And Tom Murphy worked with Dan Burke, a tremendous combination. It's a business I don't know anything about, but I admire Bill Gates enormously. I know him individually, and I think he's incredible in business. And so I do believe that. I only believe in working with people I like. I mean, and we have a very small office. We have maybe 10 or 11 people there, but I think it's crazy to take a job or work with people that cause your stomach to churn and keep you up at night and all of that. And if you're in a job like that, think about changing it. I've said that working with people you don't like in business is really like marrying for money, which is probably a bad idea under any circumstances, but it's crazy if you're already rich, right? So I work with people I like. I mean, I tap dance every day to work, and I'm with people that I think they're terrific. I admire them. I gave a talk to some student at Harvard asked me to talk last year. He said, who should I go to work for? I said, well, go to work for whomever you admire the most. And got a call from the dean about 2 weeks later. He said, what'd you tell these kids? He said, they're all becoming self-employed.
Berkshire Hathaway is currently the most expensive stock that trades on the New York Stock Exchange. When Mr. Buffett was in Chapel Hill in October of 1994, the stock was trading for around $20,000 per share. After a best-selling book on Mr. Buffett was published, the share price pushed above $25,000 in the early part of 1995. He's often asked about his views on splitting the stock, and in the next section, he gives an answer that illustrates his overall approach to investing.
Yep.
Mr. Buffett, I would love to buy a share of Berkshire Hathaway. Unfortunately, my cash flow is a little tight now.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Berkshire
We've got a
Hathaway
loan company, too.
Have you considered splitting the stock?
Yeah, I get asked that occasionally. I got a philosophy about shareholders that essentially, if you're a public company, anybody can become your partner in the business. I mean, if I was going to decide to build a motel here or start a mini steel works or something, I could invite 10 or 12 people to be my partners, and I would be sure they would be compatible with me because I'd select them, and they'd select me. And in a private business, private partnership, you should get a good relationship among the owners because they have a chance to sit down and decide who wants to be associated with whom. But in a public company, anybody can buy or sell. I mean, you can have anybody. The only qualification is money, which, as you mentioned, is sometimes a limiting factor. But at Berkshire, I want to get people as shareholders, as partners of mine, who have got the same expectations, the same time horizons, the same methods of measurement that I have. I mean, it's crazy to go into business with somebody that's got entirely different expectations than you have. So the only way I can affect that, since anybody can buy it, is by my communications and policies. I will try to follow policies, and I will try to communicate with the people who are my partners or my would-be partners, so that the right kind of people, in terms of expectations, I don't mean the right kind of people that they're necessarily people you want to have at a cocktail party or something, but the people who are going to be happy when I'm happy with results and who are going to be unhappy when I'm unhappy. The worst thing in the world, though, we could stick a sign outside this hall tonight, and we could put rock concert on it, and we'd have one kind of crowd come in. And we could put ballet, and we'd have a somewhat different kind of crowd come in. Both crowds are fine, but it's a terrible mistake to put rock concert out there if you're going to have the ballet or vice versa. And the only way I have of sticking a sign on Berkshire as to the kind of place I'm asking people to enter is through the communications and policies. Splitting the stock is a relatively minor item in that. But essentially, I would rather have people as owners that expect to own it the rest of their lives. I mean, ideally, I don't want anybody to say about selling it next week or next month or next year. They may change their mind, and that's fine. But I really want them to go in the idea that they're going into partnership with me for the rest of their lives. And if they're buying because they think the stock is going to be split 50 for 1, or because they think the earnings are going to be up next quarter or something like that, they're not terrible people, but they are going to change their mind after they get into the hall, and they're going to think this is the wrong kind of place. All the seats are going to be occupied. That's the nature of the stock market. All the shares of General Motors or Berkshire Hathaway or General Electric are going to be owned by somebody. And it makes sense, in my view, to follow policies that get people that are as close to you in objectives and expectations as you can have. And by not splitting, we've eliminated some people we wouldn't like to eliminate. We've also eliminated all the kind of people that are basically interested in trading stocks actively. And that's that's a good group from my standpoint. The New York Stock Exchange is not wild about it because we probably, well, I know we have by far the lowest turnover relative to capitalization of any stock on the exchange. But that, to me, that's terrific. I mean, if I had a club or if I was preaching at a church, I would not measure my success by how frequent the turnover of the congregation was or the club membership would be. I would really like the idea nobody wanted to leave their seat, so there wasn't any seat available for someone else.
I was wondering if you could share a story with us as one of your investment non-successes or failures.
Let's call them failures, yeah, right.
Failures.
Yeah.
And maybe what it is, why it failed, and maybe some of the reasons that are lessons you learned from that failure that would be helpful to us.
Yeah. I make more mistakes when I have a lot of cash around. I think your decision-making, or my decision-making acuity folds or fades with extra cash because I just think there's more of a compulsion to do something when you're sitting around with cash than if you have to either sell something or maybe borrow money, although we're not big on borrowed money. So I would say that's been one causal factor over the years. Fortunately, most of the time I haven't had much cash around, so it's not been a major problem. But it has caused me. I'd like to think that's what caused it. Maybe it was just plain stupidity at the time. It has been. It's interesting. I made a study back when I ran a partnership of all our large investments, or larger investments. I think we've generally not had large losses relative to capital. The largest loss we've ever had, either in the partnership in Berkshire, probably was 2% of net worth. So the nature of not doing very many things and being careful about them probably will keep you from making big errors of commission. Now, errors of omission are the ones that are the big sins. And I wrote in a report a couple of years ago, I've got a thing in my report called Mistake du Jour, and I managed to come up with one every year too. And I started out to buy Fannie Mae, for example, back in 1988 or so. And for one reason or another, I just didn't follow through. We'd have made about $1.5 billion on that. I think we made about $5 million. Those are the mistakes you don't see. The mistakes you don't see are, in our case, are way bigger than the mistakes that you see. We owned 5% of the Walt Disney Company in 1966. The whole Walt Disney Company was selling for $80 million in 1966, debt-free. $4 million bought us 5% of the company. They spent $17 million on the Pirates ride in 1966 building. Here was a company selling at less than 5 times rides. And they had a lot of rides. I mean, that is cheap. I remember the knock on it in Wall Street that was that they were earning a lot of money that year, and it was Mary Poppins, and that there wasn't anything coming next year. And I remember I went to see Mary Poppins at a theater on Broadway, about 45th. At about 2 in the afternoon, I've got a little attaché case and everything. I'm going to see Mary Poppins. I got up to this woman at the ticket booth, and I said, "I've got a kid around here someplace." I'm taking I was going to see if I thought this thing could be run over and over again in the future. But here they were. They had 200 and some films of one sort or another in the can at that point. They had 300 acres down in Anaheim with Disneyland drawing at that time 9 million people a year, and the whole place was selling for $80 million. So we bought 5% for $4 million. And the great news is we sold 5% for $6 million about a year later. That 5% now would be worth about $1 billion. But you don't see that. That conventional accounting doesn't pick that up. That's the kind of mistake I made. Yeah.
Mr. Buffett, what prompted you to make an investment in U.S. Air, given the fact that this is such a cutthroat industry and certainly not transparent and easily understandable?
Well, I think probably the best answer is temporary insanity. The fellow who runs the U.S. Air is a wonderful guy. But he just happens to be in an extraordinarily tough business. And the interesting thing is, I'd actually written something for Graham's book in the early 70s about how the airline business was about the toughest business there was. And the interesting thing, of course, is that if you go back to the time, and we're in the right state for that, if we go back to the time of Kitty Hawk, net, the airline transport business in the United States has made no money. I mean, just think if you'd been down there at Kitty Hawk and you'd seen this guy go up and all of a sudden this vision hits you that that tens of millions of people would be doing this all over the world someday, and it would bring us all closer together. I think, my God, this is something to be in on. And despite putting in billions and billions and billions of dollars, the net return to owners from being in the entire airline industry, if you'd owned it all, and you put up all this money, is less than zero. If there had been a capitalist down there, the guy should have shot down Wilbur. I mean, one small step for mankind and one huge step backwards for capitalism. But anyway, so along comes 1989, and I've got a lot of cash, and no one misled me in any way, shape, or form. I mean, this is 100% my decision, and I put money in it. And Seth Schofield, you can't find a better human being or manager than Seth Schofield, but he is operating with revenues based on market factors and costs that are not based on market factors, and that's a recipe for a lot of trouble. So I now have this 800 number, and if I ever get the urge to buy an airline stock, I dial this number, and I say, my name is Warren, I'm an airaholic, and then this guy talks me down on the other end.
Warren Buffett's approach to investing removes the worry of predicting where the stock market's going to go. He simply pays no attention to it. In this next section, you'll see why and why he considers owning the stock the next best thing to owning the company. He also responds to student questions about recent trends in banking consolidation, about investing outside of the United States, and about how to judge the franchise value of a company.
I never think about what the stock market is going to do, because if Walt Disney had come to me in 1966 and said, and it was a private company, said, would you like to buy 5% of this company for $4 million? I would not think about what the stock market was going to do. I would think about what I thought the Walt Disney Company was going to do over time. And if in 1988, Roberto Goizueta, let's say Coca-Cola had been private, and he'd come to me and said, you want to buy 6 1/fraction% of the Coca-Cola company for $1 billion? I would look at the Coca-Cola company. So if something appears to me to be intelligent to do, I'm not going to forego doing it because I or anybody else has an opinion about the stock market. If Alan Greenspan came up and whispered in my ear and said, I think bonds are going to do this or that, and then therefore stocks will do, I wouldn't pay any attention, not because I don't respect Alan Greenspan. It's just I'm not going to trade something I know how to do and give up something I know how to do because of some opinion about something I don't know how to do. And I don't know how to predict the stock market. I don't know how to predict interest rates. I don't know how to predict business. All I know is if I buy the right kind of business, the right price, with the right people, I'll do well over time. And in stocks, it's very hard to know when something will happen, and it's very easy to know what will happen. And we bought See's Candy in 1971 or 2. That wouldn't be familiar too much on the East Coast here, but it's very dominant in boxed chocolates on the West Coast. When it so happened that a grandson of the founder wanted to sell the company. Now, I wouldn't think about what the stock market's going to do when I try and decide whether to buy See's chocolates. What I'm thinking about is whether Russell Stover can knock them out of the box, or whether you can raise your prices periodically as you go along, how strong their hold is on people who are chocolate consumers in the West. And if that's my attitude toward buying 100% of a business like See's, it's also going to be my attitude toward buying 6% of a business like Coca-Cola. In other words, why in the world should I pass up the chance? Coca-Cola went public in either 19 or 20, I think 19, at $40 a share. The Candler family had sold it. They sold it through I guess it would have been then J.P. Morgan, the predecessor company, and the trust company of Georgia, which is now part of SunTrust. The fee was $200,000 and some for this $25 million offering, and Morgan took theirs in cash. The Trust Company of Georgia took theirs in stock. So you'll see on the Trust Company of Georgia or SunTrust balance sheet a little item, investment in Coca-Cola with a cost of $110,000. It's worth a little over $1 billion now. And subsequent to going public, the stock went down 50%, over 50%. That's when Mr. Woodruff came back from Cleveland, where he was working with a White Motor Company, and they brought him back to run it. They had a problem with the bottlers because of some contractual arrangements. They'd made a bad deal back in 1899 in terms of the original. Back in 2 years whether the stock market will be higher and lower. I do know there will be intelligent things to do between now and then, and that if you see one, the thing to do is to do it. Yep.
From your point of view, what's the difference in investing in the entire company like See's versus just a piece of the company like Coca-Cola?
Well, there's way less difference than most people think, in my view. If I own all of See's at Berkshire and we want to change the management, we can change the management. But I don't want to get in with managements we need to change in the first place. I mean, I'm not. If I got into See's and I thought if I were going to buy See's and I thought I needed to change the management, I might not buy it because I wouldn't. You know, what do I know about making chocolate? So I want to find them with good management. But it is true that if you had a managerial problem and you owned it all, you could change it. It is also true that you can take the capital out of the earnings out of a business that you control 100% of. You can decide the distribution policy and put them over someplace else, and that's an advantage to us. If the XYZ company that we own 5% of wants to go out and buy movie studios or whatever they might want to do, they get to allocate the capital. And all things being equal, and even unequal, I would rather allocate the capital, and I can do that if we own 100%. So that's an advantage owning 100%. But it's so much more important to own a good business and be in with good managers than to have this little extra advantage of being able to change managers. That it's not a big difference. I would rather own the good business than own all of it. I mean, I'd like to own all of the Coca-Cola, but I'm not going to own all Coca-Cola. So is that a reason not to buy 7%? No. The one advantage we have at Berkshire is that we have this mental flexibility, but all we're doing is trying to figure out how to put capital into good businesses. And we're not in the steel business per se. We're not in the shoe business per se. We're not in any business per se. We're big in insurance, but we're not in insurance. We're not committed to it. We don't have a mindset which says you got to go down this road. So we can take capital and we can move it into businesses that make sense, and that is an advantage. And since I don't come up the route from any one of these businesses, I've got that advantage of being somewhat detached, perhaps, and therefore objective. Then the question is whether it's smart, but at least I should be objective about it. Banking consolidation, well, it's going to continue in a big way, and most people like to. Most managers like to grow, and they like to grow intelligently if they can, but if they can't, they're also willing to grow in other ways. And it is, every year the American Banker, which is the daily banking publication, every year they list what used to be 13 or 14,000 banks by size. They don't list them by profitability. In the first 100, they used to show the pictures of the CEOs of the 100 largest banks. And I think that probably has some effect. If you start measuring yourself by size, they measure by assets, but the assets are always balanced off by liabilities in that strange accounting convention. It's the only business in the world where people brag about how much they owe. They say, I got a $100 billion bank, which means they owe $100 billion, or close to it. But I myself do not see, among the banks I look at, economies of scale beyond certain points. There's always an advantage to being dominant in a market, but I'm not sure whether if you've got $200 billion spread across the country and 15% market shares, you're going to have a better business than the guy who's got 30% of the market in Rockford, Illinois, which we used to own a bank in Rockford, Illinois, and which made 2% on assets after tax, and was conservative in every respect, but that bank would earn less money as part of a larger institution. I'm convinced of that. So I don't see great advantages to shareholders in terms of major expansions of banks. I'm not saying it's all a mistake, because I've seen some good acquisitions. Wells Fargo made a terrific acquisition of Crocker, for example, some years back. But I think it will continue, and I think probably bank shareholders are going to be a little luckier than the acquiring banks shareholders.
I was wondering if you would comment on your perspective of investments outside of the U.S. and in particular address your perspective on how you would hedge currency risk.
Yeah, through Gillette makes about 2/3 of its money outside the United States. We own about 11% of Gillette, and Coke makes over 80% of its money outside the United States. We own 7.7% of Coke. We love the kind of companies that can do well in international markets, obviously, and particularly where they're largely untapped. would we buy Coca-Cola if instead of being domiciled in Atlanta, it was domiciled in London or Amsterdam or someplace? The answer, of course, is yes. Would I like it quite as well? Probably just a tiny notch less, because there might be nuances of corporate governance factors or tax factors or attitudes toward capitalists or anything else that I might not quite understand quite as well, even in England, as I might in the United States. But so I prefer, by a small margin to many countries and by a large margin to other countries, I prefer a U.S. domicile operation. But I also prefer businesses that earn high returns on capital and all of that sort of thing. So we will look any place to find a good business. And I find it easier to find them in the U.S. I understand the accounting a little bit better. I probably have more insight into how they're going to function in the future, a little more here than in some other country. But I don't rule them out. On the other hand, the U.S. equity market is a $5 trillion market, and if I can't make money in a $5 trillion market, it may be a little bit of wishful thinking to think all I have to do is get a few thousand miles away and I'll start showing my stuff. Yeah.
You and Mr. Munger have long talked about franchise value of businesses. And without tipping your hat, I'm just curious as to what areas what do you perceive as that it has franchise value right now?
Well, franchise value, I mean, the real test is if they don't have your product, but they have something that somebody else says is similar, does the would-be purchaser walk out of the store, particularly if they can walk across the street and buy it? I mean, so if you go in and you say, I'd like a Hershey bar, and they say, well, we don't have Hershey bars, we've got this unmarked chocolate bar, that the owner of the place recommends. Now, if you'll walk across the street to buy a Hershey bar, or if you pay a nickel more for the bar than the unmarked bar, something like that, that's franchise value. And you have to maintain that in people's minds, but it's very important. That was our consideration. When we bought See's Candy, candy was selling for $1.95 a pound. And the question was, would people pay more for that candy as years went along and inflation took place? And the truth is that people, if they perceive that it's the best candy, or a significant percentage of them do in the area, or the dominant percentage do, you're going to do very well with a business like that. The franchise is in their mind. I mean, it's the experience they had. I mean, it's the first time they handed it to a girl and she kissed them afterwards or whatever, or slapped them. I mean, that's what we like them to do with the competitors' candy. But, and you know this, they're not going to go home on Valentine's Day and say, here, honey, here's 2 pounds of chocolates. I took the low bid. I mean, it just doesn't work. So if you've got the right kind of product that way, if you're Wrigley's chewing gum or whatever it may be, you're paying. You may be paying for taste in this case. You may be paying for a mental association that you have. You may be paying for service availability or a lot of things. But that's franchise value. And then the question is how durable is it? How big is it and how durable is it? And I say that franchise is basically like a moat around your economic castle. Now, there's two things that are important. How big is the castle? Coca-Cola is a big castle. See's Candy is not a very big castle, but it's a castle. And around both of those, there's a moat. And that moat is either slightly eroding service, it may be based on employee training, it may be based on research, a lot of things. I mean, there are all kinds of things you're trying to do to make that moat bigger and bigger and to throw more piranha and crocodiles and et cetera into the moat. And you need a moat in business to protect you from some guy who's going to come along and offer it for a penny cheaper. That's what we're looking for all the time. And you can't find it all. You're not going to find it in carbon steel. You're not going to find it with an integrated oil company or something of the sort in all likelihood. But you will find it. You don't have to find very many. Very few. If you have 10 good ideas in the rest of your life, you can afford to give away 5 of them because you'll get very rich with a very few good ideas.
Each year, the Berkshire Hathaway annual report is eagerly awaited by shareholders. That's because Mr. Buffett writes it himself. Part of the report, the chairman's letter, has become a widely cited source of business advice. In fact, the entire report is so readable that it's cited as a model for how financial reports should be written. In this next segment, we'll hear about Mr. Buffett's views on clear writing, we'll hear about why he thinks Berkshire Hathaway may be less successful in the future, and we'll hear his views on inherited wealth.
If you understand an idea, you can express it so other people understand it. It's interesting, right? I find that every year when I write the report. I mean, I hit these blocks, and the block isn't because, I've run out of words in the dictionary. The block is because I haven't got it straight in my own mind yet. And there's nothing like writing to force you to think and get your thoughts straight. And if you want to communicate something to other investors, co-owners, or whatever it may be, it's quite possible to do it. I mean, I think based on what Chairman Levitt said, I think you're going to probably see a lot of improvement in that area. Same thing goes for accounting footnotes. I mean, I get accounting footnotes that I have trouble understanding. Well, the reason I have trouble understanding is the person that wrote it didn't want me to understand it. I mean, it's not impossible to write a footnote explaining deferred acquisition costs and life insurance, whatever you want to do. You can write it so people can understand it. And if it's written so you can't understand it, I am very suspicious. I mean, I probably won't invest. Well, I won't invest in the company where I can't understand a footnote, because I know they don't want me to understand it. The greater the amount of capital we work with at Berkshire, the worse we are going to do in terms everything else being equal in terms of percentage returns on equity. And I've been telling our shareholders that for years. And the reason is very simple. That when I started out with $10,000, any security in the United States that I could find that seemed cheap could have a very significant impact on that amount of capital. Now, if we find something we can put $100 million in and we make 50%, that's $50 million pre-tax. It's about $32.5 million after tax, and that's 0.3% on net worth. So it takes very big ideas to have an impact, and our universe of potential investments has shrunk, or businesses that we can buy outright, has shrunk as our capital gets greater. We are down to where our universe is very, very small, and our returns cannot be as good in the future as in the past. When I started out, I went through Moody's and Standard & Poor's page by page. Every page, I just looked at companies, and I found Western Insurance Security selling at 2 times earnings, or National American Insurance selling at 2 times earnings. I found a public utility in Genesee, New York, selling at less than 2 times earnings. That was just by turning the pages. But I could only put $5,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 in those things. They still had the capacity maybe to double my net worth or something of the sort, or more than that maybe. But that'd be useless for me to do that now at Berkshire. So a lot of money is a drag, but it has other advantages.
I've read that you're not going to burden your children with the fortune that you've amassed.
That's not the word they use, but you've got the idea.
I was just wondering, to that extent, could you lend some words of wisdom about family and disciplining children with money?
Well, my general belief is if you've got a lot of money, that you should probably, and I got this idea, this phrase from somebody else, but that you should leave your children enough money so they can do anything, but not enough so they can do nothing. And I think that there's probably a certain social justice in that. I think, and on top of that, I happen to think it's probably, in aggregate, it's probably best for development of individuals, although there could be lots of exceptions to that. But I have used the analogy that, I run into people all the time, at the country club, who say, isn't it terrible that these people are on welfare, and that they get food stamps, and then that just creates a cycle of dependency, and then you get second-generation welfare recipients because they were used to getting the food stamps from the welfare officer before, and they never stop to think that maybe inherited wealth is really just a lifetime supply of food stamps, given through a trust officer instead of a welfare officer. They never think about the debilitating effect of that, that waking up at age 10 seconds and finding out that you never have to work. Compare that to somebody that's probably got a couple of kids that they don't know what to do with, and have plenty of problems of their own, and are struggling, and they say, well, we're going to ruin this poor person's desire to work if we don't, if we give them something to let them buy a little food. I personally think that society is responsible for a very significant percentage of what I've earned. I mean, if you stick me down in the middle of Bangladesh or Peru or someplace, you'll find out how much this talent is going to produce in the wrong kind of soil, and I will be struggling 30 years later. So society, I work in a market system that happens to reward what I do very well, disproportionately well. But so does, Mike Tyson did too. I mean, if you can knock a guy out, in 10 seconds and earn $10 million for it, this world will pay a lot for that. If you can bat 360, this world will pay a lot for it. If you're a marvelous teacher, this world won't pay a lot for it. If you're a terrific nurse, this world will not pay a lot for it. Now, am I going to try and come up with some comparable world system that somehow distributes that? No, I don't think you can do that. But I do think that when you're treated enormously well by this market system, or in effect, the rest of society showers goods and services, or the ability to buy goods and services on you because of some peculiar talent. Maybe your adenoids are a certain way, so you can sing and everybody will pay you enormous sums to be on television or whatever. I think society's should have a big claim on that. If you're lucky enough to be the child of somebody in that position, I think cutting them off with zero is probably a mistake, but I think that setting them up so that essentially they've got this lifetime supply of claims on other people's production of goods and services in society for the rest of their life, it doesn't make much sense to me. My kid will be glad to come and rebut this next week.